able to finish it. Everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. Or suppose
Okay, so that was one example they just gave for what?
you need to watch and pray.
Okay, so you are watching. You are not walking blindly. You are counting the cost. Okay, so that's the first example. Number two example.
Number two example, the example that Christ gave, the king.
Yeah, go.
Or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he is not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and will ask for terms of peace.
Okay, so that's the second one. Your eyes are open, you are seeing the troops coming, you are counting the cost, you are watching, and you're doing so prayerfully. Okay? That's it, or there's more? Okay, all right. Yes? Okay. All right.
Make things right before you are alive.
While you are alive,
Make things right while you are alive.
okay, then read the passage now.
Luke 32 to 33. If he is not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and will ask for terms of peace. In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples.
Okay, so the last part there being the final reconciliation. Okay. Good. Anyone who wants to add anything or subtract? Oh, thank you very much. Please be seated. Please. Yeah. Yes. Wonderful. Wonderful. That's a good observation as well. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's also a very good observation because that ties everything together. Okay, so what I want us to do now is to go into the theory, the theoretical part of teaching from the epistles. I will give that to you in the next hour or so. I'll try and keep it as interactive as possible so that you don't fall asleep. But then at 13 hours, we'll break off for lunch. But once we come back after 13 hours, I will want us to go back into groups to now deal with the passages or the passage that I'll give you in terms of preparing a lesson. Okay, so okay, so what we've basically done so far is quite a chunk of the entire Bible in terms of preparing to deal with the lessons there. In the New Testament, although the Gospels cover quite some section because they are long, but in terms of numbers, if you are to count, in terms of number of books, the epistles are by far the majority. Now, the thing about the epistles is that they are like listening to one side of a telephone conversation. So what's happening is that there's a situation that has happened in Corinth or in the province of Galatia or in the capital city of Asia, which is Ephesus, or whatever. Something has happened on the island of Crete and so on. And the Apostle Paul, or later on Peter and James or John, they are responding to that conversation. And so what you're doing is you're listening only to that part. I remember many years ago, it's now close to 40 years ago, I was working in the mines, and my immediate supervisor on one occasion was Lozi. I think it's Lozi. And he would be talking on the phone. And I could only hear what he was saying. But the way he was saying it gave me the impression that there must be something very interesting is being taught. Because he would be there, those days we didn't have any cell phones, it was landline. And he would be saying, Kimani, Kimani, oh, Kimani, Kimani. So I remember coming to Evangel Baptist Church and naming Mr. Milapo's first child as Kimani. Okay. It was just one side of the conversation that I was hearing, but it gave me something of an impression that there was something very interesting that was happening on the other side. And so, as you are handling the epistles, it's just good for you to say to yourself, what could the situation have been that was being addressed? Now, thankfully, you don't need to do too much guesswork, as I hope to show you in a moment. Often, in what is being written, there is something. Like, for instance, to Titus, the Apostle Paul says something like, the reason why I left you in Crete was in order for you to finish off the things that I had left unfinished. In all the towns, appoint elders and so on. So you are able to say, okay, something has happened that makes the Apostle Paul leave an unfinished work. But he's not willing to just abandon it and move off. He wants to make sure that he leaves Titus to continue with the work. And these are the responsibilities that he is giving to him. The letters are, first of all, we have letters to individuals like Titus, we just talked about, Timothy and Philemon. We also have letters to specific churches. I mentioned Ephesus, Corinth, Rome, or the church, the letter to the Romans. And then you've got the general letters like James and Peter and 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. They are general letters that are being written. And sometimes it can be quite confusing, especially to a young Christian, because Titus is a letter to Titus. But Peter is not a letter to Peter. It is a letter Peter wrote to the churches, or James. James is not the one receiving the letter. He is the one who wrote it. And then there are also letters that were written to a wider area, such as Galatians. Galatians was not written to one church. Galatia itself was a province and a number of churches in that province. So that's just a general overview of the letters. And then, again, the structure of the letters. Generally speaking, today, when you write a letter, the first is dear so and so. So you immediately see who has been written to, and then you have to go to the bottom of the letter to know who wrote it. In terms of the New Testament, it's rather different. You have the author first, and then you've got who is being written to second. The reason is quite simple. It is that in those days, the letters were written on scrolls. So on a scroll, if the name is at the bottom, the scroll, you have to completely unscroll it first to see, okay, who has written. You can't just peep down there because it's a scroll. So as a result, they put both names right at the top, the author and the one is writing to. That way, if it's none of your business, you can even go for a walk because it's got nothing to do with you as it is being read out. So that's what you had, and then immediately after that comes the greetings, and then from the greetings, you went into what the issues were all about. And then at the end, you didn't have the name because the name was already mentioned. Rather, what you ended up with were the final greetings, and then everything was gone. But one thing that helps with learning to teach from the letters is that often just after the greeting, the first paragraph already gives you a hint of what the rest of the letter is about. Again, it's quite simple. It's because it's a scroll, and the scroll can be quite long. And therefore, it sort of sets in front of you the very reason why you ought to be interested in what you are seeing now. Okay. All right. Seems there's an emergency. Sorry, Akili, could you mention to him that I'll only be free at 1 o'clock? Okay, that's when I'll go. Thanks. Yeah, so that first paragraph helps you to see what is there. It's like, if I can use an example, I may have mentioned it here, I can't remember, the difference between fiction and fact. Did I mention it here? Okay. The difference is this, that with fiction, you don't want to know the end until the end. With fact, you want to know the end at the beginning. Okay, so for instance, when you open a newspaper is not fiction. It is not supposed to be. What makes you read an article is the heading. So if you see something like, ECL blasts HH, then you want to read, what is this all about? Okay, but if the heading is something like, John Banda goes to Twapia, you sort of go to the next one. Okay, you're not interested. Who's just John Banda and what's Twapia? So you move on to something else. So, and that is fact. You want to see what this is about, and then you read it. With respect to fiction, it's the exact opposite. And I think it's been your experience. For instance, if someone already watched a movie, and now he is sitting with you as you are watching it for the first time, and now it's really dangerous. Even the music is going, and your adrenaline is really being bored and your body temperature is rising, and then the guy sitting next to you saying, "Don't worry, tabamuipai." Hey, come on, get up, get up. You know, he's spoiling the fun. You don't want to know the end until you get there. That's part of the joy. Okay. So, in the same way, with respect to sermons and with respect to the epistles, you are actually told at the beginning what this is all about. And then you follow through. And two things will prove the point. Number one, if you've ever been sitting, listening to a preacher, and for the first 5 to 10 minutes, you can't tell what he's talking about, where it's going. Have you felt that frustration? Yeah, guys, where is he going? What is he talking about? And so on. You know, you want quickly to know what this sermon is all about, and then you begin to follow. Another experience is where you come for a sermon a little late. It has already started, and you sit there, you get your pen and paper, and you're now trying to take notes. And if you don't know what this sermon is about, it's very difficult for you to start taking notes. I don't know about you, but that's the way I feel. I'm with a pen, I'm thinking, I need to anchor somewhere to see where this thing is going. Otherwise, I'll be writing everything he's saying, which you don't want to do. Okay, and then hopefully, somewhere quickly enough, the person says, so, as I said at the beginning, this is what it is, and therefore, we have observed, and then point two, I have now caught on, and we are able to go together. So the letters are like that. The letters, they betray to you what they're about at the very commencement. And that's the way you are helped as you will be dealing with the content. They are written, I think I've talked about this already, on a specific occasion about a specific issue. Okay, so each of those letters, you want to be able to arrive at roughly when and what the issue was. A typical example is 1 Corinthians. Okay, could someone read 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1? Someone else, 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1, and then someone else, 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 1. Just 3 individuals, and the point will be made. 7 verse 1, who will read that for us? Yes? Okay, thank you. Chapter 8, verse 1. Who's going to raise his hand for us? Okay? And then 12, verse 1. Yes. Okay. So you can see that there were a number of issues that had been brought to the Apostle Paul, and he is beginning to address them one after the other. And that gives you a sense of what is happening in that epistle. And you can't miss it from the very beginning. He says, now I hear there are divisions among you. So some people have gone to him and told him about what's happening in this church. Now he is addressing those matters. Some of the issues that are addressed in the epistles are joyful issues, positive issues, praiseworthy issues, but some of them are negative issues, issues that necessitate rebukes, so on. So it really varies. What is also important to realize, and I realized this long after I already began preaching, is that although Paul wrote and Galatians and all these others, he actually didn't write them. He dictated them. And then at the end, he signed the letter. And the individuals that he mentions at the beginning to be with him are often the ones who actually paid as he was dictated. So, for you taking notes, you can see that from Romans 16:22 and Galatians 6, verse 11. The only thing I want to add is the fact that often in knowing these circumstances, it helps you to prepare your lesson. You want to be misapplying what it is that you are seeing there. The reason why teaching from the letters is unique is because the letters of all our entire Bible, the letters are the ones that are the most rich doctrinally. And they handle issues in the church in a very practical and pastoral way. You won't find that anywhere else in the rest of the Bible. If you go to the Old Testament, for instance, there was no church there. There was a nation. It was the nation of Israel. But there wasn't a church. You can't even claim that the temple is the equivalent of the church. You can't even make that claim because there is no sacrifice that is being made in the church. And yet that was the center of activity as far as the Old Testament worship was concerned. But for us, the sacrifice has already been made by Jesus Christ. So when we come together, there's no altar. Although the Roman Catholics talk about having an altar in front. But there's no altar. Our buildings are actually, I know you might want to consider it as holy, but they are actually not holy. They are just blocks put together with a ceiling. That's all they are. It's the activity that happens inside that is a holy activity. Otherwise, it's just structure. It's just window panes and doors, wooden and so forth. So tomorrow you can bring down the entire building and put another one, or you can just set it off and get a nicer piece of land and put up a mammoth structure there and so forth. Okay, so the whole point I'm trying to make is that the epistles are the closest to us. The closest to us. If you want to know how to handle membership, how to function in your meetings, how to appoint leaders, how to handle evangelism and missions, and how to discipline and excommunicate, and so it's all there in the epistles because they were dealing with all these issues. Sometimes you hear Christians say, you know, how I wish we can go back to New Testament times. You know, they make you feel as though in New Testament times the church was just perfect. And then we've come along and we've messed up everything. But that's not true. And the very reason why these epistles mean so much to us is because they are handling the mess that was there in New Testament times. So you have to ask a person like that, okay, choose which of the churches do you want us to be like? And the moment you begin, you know, Corinthians, no. Already we've got problems. Galatians, no, please, and so on. So you can already see that you are dealing with problem situations there as well. The other bit to do again with the background is the map that is at the back of your Bibles. Now, trust me, up to now, even last Sunday, I was referring to the map that is at the back of your Bible. So I hope your Bible has a map. Thank you very much. Mr. Simchimba has a map there. I hope it has a map. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, now the maps, they are quite a number, but inevitably, you should have a map that is showing the early church period, and it's usually with the missionary journeys of the Apostle Paul. It's very helpful because it enables you to see where this particular church was and at what point the work was developed in the development of the churches in the wider area. So, for instance, the reason why I referred to this particular map was that when I was preaching last Sunday, I went from Philippi in Acts chapter 16 to Athens. Thessalonica, yes, in beginning of Acts chapter 17. And it mentions the fact that Paul and Silas went through Apollonia and Amphilia or something like that. So I inevitably wanted to see why they did not stop in those two places and instead went up to Thessalonica. And the only way I could appreciate that was to go to the map. And I noticed from the map that, yes, these two were along the way, but Thessalonica was more of a port city. And then the more I read about Thessalonica, the more I realized that it was a major city compared with Amphilia and Apollonia. So the same thing with Philippi itself, from Troas. You easily discover that as you make your way from Troas, which was in Asia, into Europe, one of the very first towns that you meet will be Philippi, and it makes sense that that's where they went. Tomorrow I will be in Athens, and it's right at the tip of Macedonia before the apostle went into Achaia. So again, the map proves very, very helpful as you are dealing with the epistles, because you get to know where these churches are. Another obvious example is when Paul says in Romans that I will pass through Spain, rather, I will pass through you, which is Rome, on my way to Spain after I have finished delivering the goods that have been donated to the brethren in Judea. When you look at the map, it's perfect. You can see that Rome is about halfway to Spain, and it makes sense that by that time he's traveling commodities and so on would have finished, or at least almost finished, and then the brethren would resupply, and as he continues the journey with his team and so on. So it just gives a three-dimensional view of this passage, rather the passage that you are looking at. Which brings me to just one more point, and it is the fact that it's good for you to tie the churches to the book of Acts. Just a healthy activity, especially with respect to Paul. Especially with respect to Paul, because you find that, for instance, Romans is right at the end. Paul is still wanting to get to Rome, and he's still awaiting to be taken there. And yet, the church has already commenced in Rome by others. First and Second Corinthians will be round about Acts 18. Galatia will be reached out earlier in Acts chapter 10 and also in chapter 13 to 14 before the Apostle Paul crosses into Europe. Ephesus as well will be in chapter 19 and then later on in chapter 20 when he bids farewell to the elders. The letter to the Philippians, his visit to Philippi, we all know the Philippian jailer in chapter 16 and Lydia and so forth. So all that to say, keep that in mind as you are dealing with the epistles. They were not all written on the same day. They were written to different churches in different circumstances. The ones that were written on the same occasion are called prison epistles. And that is Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and at least Philemon. They were all written at about the same time. And you can also see a number of similarities. For instance, in Ephesians, the Apostle Paul deals with husbands, wives, parents, children, slaves, and masters. He does exactly the same thing in the letter to the Colossians. He was basically writing from the same place. And towards the end, he speaks about the same guys, Tychicus and others, who are now going to deliver these letters to the churches. Okay, so one more thing, and then we'll get into the meat of this. All I want to emphasize is I hope you are seeing that we are beginning a completely different corpus of writings. And once you learn how to handle them, generally speaking, you've also learned how to handle the sermons in Acts and the sermons in the Gospels, because they were essentially teaching opportunities. There are at least 5, 6, 7 letters that are referred to as general epistles. Hebrews, we don't even know who wrote it. People have argued across history, some saying it was the Apostle Paul and so forth. But generally speaking, the author is not stated in the book itself. Then you've got James. Then you've got Peter. Peter wrote 2 letters, 1 Peter and 2 Peter. And when you read them, it's very clear that it is to the believers in the diaspora. And then you've got 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. And then lastly, Jude. Basically, these are referred to as general epistles. Now, for those of you who've got pen and paper, if it was on the screen, I was going to point it out. This is what you do when you're now beginning to handle any one of them. So let's suppose you want to go through Galatians. Let's just suppose you want to go through Galatians. What is the first thing you should do? I'll obviously say, oh yes, by the way, my apologies. I didn't send you the PowerPoint for the last time. But this one I'll send, eh? So if you miss out taking the notes, by the end of today, I'll just send it to Mr. Chingambu and he will send it to you. Okay, but the first thing is read through the whole letter several times. Read through the whole letter several times. The advantage you have with the epistles is that they are short. Okay? Sometimes 3 chapters, sometimes 5 chapters, but they're very, very short. They're like the minor prophets. Very, very short. So you can read through and read through and read through, and you discover that each time you read through, something fresh pops up. Okay, so read through several times. And as you read through, here's the second point, jot down the kind of thoughts that are arising in your mind that don't have immediate answers. Jot them down. Like, for instance, an obvious one. He says at the end, greet one another with a holy kiss. Just jot down, what's a holy kiss? And leave it there for now. At this stage, you're just wanting to take note of those things that don't have immediate answers. Okay? So that's number 2. Number 3, see if there are any individuals that are mentioned in that letter. Any individuals. Now, the Pauline ones will usually have him and somebody else who have written. Then, somewhere in between, you might find reference to somebody like Epaphroditus and so on, mentioned somewhere in between, or Titus. I sent Titus to you and so on. But then at the end, you will find quite a number of people being greeted. So again, just take note of those individuals and later on, try and learn about them. Okay. Before you teach, try and learn about those individuals. It's amazing how much you learn about a letter from the individuals that are involved. For instance, anytime Silas is mentioned, you know that in the book of Acts, it was after Acts 16. You know that. Because prior to Acts 16, Paul was with Barnabas. So it immediately tells you that this was after this particular period. Similarly with Timothy being mentioned, Timothy was picked up also along the way. So again, it enables you to say, okay, so it is beyond this point. So, names. Number 4, try and see what words are repeated often, other than Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ will be appearing literally on every page, about 10 times on every page. But what words are repeated? Because often that's where you catch what is being said the most. Okay, so what words are repeated? Number 5. Are there any hints as to why the letter was written? Are there any hints? As you are reading through, what would have made the Apostle Paul to write? You want to take note of that and keep it, because it will give you a sense of direction. You know, sometimes you are visiting a home, and there's a husband and wife, and the husband says something, and the wife's answer is not related whatsoever to what the husband said. And you find the husband goes something like, and you're sitting there thinking, oh, I hope I haven't stepped in ubuchi here, and so forth. But thankfully, if they're mature, they diffuse the situation immediately. And, oh, no, what I meant was this and so on. And even if it's not really true, the husband says, okay. And the whole thing passes. The point I'm trying to make there is there must be a relationship between why the letter was written and the specific issue that you are actually dealing with there. And then, second last, are there hints as to what was happening when the letter was written? Now, this is not necessarily why it was written, But around the time that the letter was written, are there hints about what was happening? So, for instance, the example I gave you where Paul is saying, right now, I'm heading out to Judea to take the gifts that were put together by the brethren in Macedonia. So I'm taking them there, and pray for me as I head out there. But once I've finished, that's when I'm going to come through to you on my way to Spain. So it gives you some idea. It can then take you to 1 Corinthians, rather 2 Corinthians, chapter 8 and chapter 9, where Paul is collecting the offering for Judea. And you say, okay, so Romans was written soon after 2 Corinthians. So he collects, and then they take the gifts. So it gives you a sense of what was happening at about that time. Lastly, in terms of the general, are you able to notice the sections of the letter? The sections of the letter. What I gave you earlier in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, chapter 8, and chapter 12 is a typical example. You are able to see where these sections begin and end. The goodness with what our Bibles, most of us, is that those sections are demarcated for us already. My Bible, doesn't matter whether it's in the Old Testament or the New Testament, on the sides, there are the subheadings. So, for instance, First Peter has greetings first, and then the next subheading is born again to a living hope. The next subheading is called to be holy. The next subheading is a living stone and a holy people. So a lot of this has been done for us already. You can do your own. As you are reading through, you are sensing about these movements. Okay, let me pause now for any questions. I still have some ground to cover, but I don't want to be flying without any clarifications. We're in the letters. Anything about the letters that so far? Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. The compilers of the New Testament were deliberate. They were like somebody who is preparing a library. And chronology was not their most important point. Okay, so it's fairly obvious they took Paul's letters and first of all put them together. And then they got the ones that he did to individuals and they put them together. And then the general epistles were put together. And then finally it was John's. Okay, Jude was squeezed in somewhere. But it was largely John's letters were, including the Revelation, were put at the very end. So, yeah, thank you very much. Just worth underscoring that so that we don't think that they are in chronological order. One more? Yes? Yeah, so Philemon was written from prison by Paul, and it is one of the prison epistles, but it's to an individual. Yeah, to Philemon himself. Yeah, it's a very unique letter because it's so personal, just to an individual. It wasn't even like, preaching, overseeing a church as such. just returning a slave back. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So, my next slide, I have in a sense covered it. I've said, take note of the beginning and take note of the end. So at the beginning, we've got the author, the recipients, the greeting, the prayer or blessing, and then the introduction, which gives you the theme of the letter. So we've already covered that. And then take note of the end. And the end, you've got the practical items. Bring my jersey, I'll pass through here when I go there, and so forth. Which, unfortunately, when we are reading the Bible, we tend to skip. We tend to not want to really think and meditate, because it looks like just a list of names. Especially like when you get to Romans 16. It's greet so-and-so, who meet in so-and-so's home, and greet so-and-so. They were my best friends once upon a time, and greet so-and-so. We labored together, and greet so-and-so. So you sort of just want to rush through all the way to the end. But think of it. Paul, at least up to this point, has not yet gone to Rome. He's not gone there. He's wanting to get there. And yet look at the list of names in a church that is not yet been. That's amazing. And the only reason that is the case is because Rome was like Lusaka. It was a capital city. And individuals who are on the Copper Belt and have never even been to Lusaka, when they come here, it's amazing how many people they already know. It's amazing. Because most of us have been to the Copper Belt and we've come back. And therefore, they are easily able to find fellowship with brethren they already know. Okay, so it tells you a lot. And then, of course, there is the postscript, which is the final benediction. Okay. I've talked about the background. I think I'll skip this. I will just leave it for you to look at later. And it's the background that helps to see why the letter was written. Okay, so I will skip that. I want to end with the structure. Okay? The structure of the letter, and then the substructure of the structure of the subdivisions. And then I'll do this in just 12 minutes, and then we'll take our break. Now, usually break, we assume lunch, and then we discover lunch is still being cooked. Can we know whether our lunch is anywhere near ready? Because what we could do, if it's not, we will then begin doing the exercise so that we can see what we are dealing with. Okay, so let's just peep. The members say the other thing that works is the stomach. Okay, so once you've known the beginning and you've known the end, because you've been reading and reading and reading and reading, you now have a sense of what is there in between those two. And your task now is to begin to say, okay, what is the first topic he deals with? What is the second topic he deals with? What is the third topic he deals with? Because that's going to give you your subdivisions. So, be deliberate about that. Thankfully, these letters that we read are not like a typical chap who's come to visit you and he doesn't have something to do, he's just wanting to waste your time and his. And therefore just talking and talking in circles and talking in circles. These letters are not like that. they go from beginning to end. There is an actual journey that they are going through. And it's helpful for you to take note of those sections, because when you will be teaching, whether it's Bible study or you'll be preaching or it's just another class you're handling, it will help you as you are making that journey. Because what you will see is that there will be these major sections, and then in those sections, there will be some subsections. Let me give you an obvious one, which very few people seem to notice. But the more you read it, the more you realize that that's what is happening. Okay, so let's go to 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians and chapter 8. 1 Corinthians chapter 8. So my version, which is the ESV, says under subheadings that chapter 8 begins with food offered to idols. Chapter 9, Paul surrenders his rights. Chapter 10, warning against idolatry. And halfway through is do all to the glory of God, which is the first verse of chapter 11. Be imitators of me as I am of Christ. Now, the truth of the matter is that all this section is actually dealing with just one thing. That's all. All these which I have read, they look many, but they're just dealing with one thing. And what is that thing? It is what he says in chapter 8, verse 1 to verse 3. Because that's what Paul does. He introduces and then he opens up everything. Okay? So he is dealing with the problem of idolatry in the context of the church. So now concerning food offered to idols, what is it that he now tells us? It is this: we know that all of us possess knowledge. In other words, we know that idols are nothing. But however, here's his point. This knowledge puffs up. It makes you proud. But what keeps your feet on the ground is love. Love builds up. So what he's trying to do here in dealing with the problem of idolatry is to put love at the center. That as you are fighting among yourselves over whether you should eat meat that is offered to idols or not, and so on, what should be number one is that you should love one another. Whatever you finally decide, you should love one another. So if anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. But if anyone, there it is, loves God, he is known by God. So he's basically saying love is that which is primary. And so as he begins now, he explains, if anybody invites you to eat food that is offered in it, to idols, this is the way you respond, and so on and so forth. What I want us to notice is when he says in verse 11, this is if you go ahead and eat when your brother stumbles. For him, idols are real. You can't eat food offered to idols without corrupting yourself. So verse 11, and so by your knowledge, this weak brother is destroyed, the brother for whom Christ died. Thus, sinning against your brothers and wounding their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Christ. Then he applies it to himself. He says, therefore, if food makes my brother to stumble, I'll never eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. So he applies it to himself. He's saying, although it's my right to eat that meat, because I know idols are nothing, but if doing so is going to cause my brother to stumble, I'd rather give up my right. And that's what chapter 9 is all about now. It is Paul saying, look at how, even in my ministry, I've given up my right. Look at me. I'm entitled to a salary from you people. But I've put it aside. Because, as we often know, if you're beginning missionary work and you're already passing around the offering bag, people are concluding, that's why he's here. Yeah, it's his stomach is concerned about here. So it says, so when I came to Corinth, although it was my right to be supported by you, I put aside so that you don't stumble. That's how I lived among you. And that's what this is all about. Look at verse 14. But I have made no use of any of these rights. Nor am I writing these things to secure any such provision. For I would rather die than for anyone to deprive me of my boasting. Verse 19. For though I am free from all, I've made myself a slave to all. I've put aside my rights for your sake, so as to win as many as possible. With that, he goes to chapter 10 and basically goes back now to idolatry. The very issue he was dealing with in chapter 8. And he says there, this is what happened in the Old Testament and so on. I will just read verse 7. Verse 7. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. As is written, the people sat up and so on and so forth. Verse 14. Therefore, my brothers, my beloved, flee from idolatry. So he's gone back now to deal with the same issue. That, yes, idols may be nothing, but idolatry can actually corrupt you. So be careful about that. And then with that, he now goes to exactly where he started. So look at verse 23. All things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. Now, that is the knowledge you have. Okay, that's why it's in quotation marks there. It's what you know. But he qualifies it. Let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. So he's back again to love. Love. Yes, these things may be nothing, but love. And so he repeats, if an unbeliever invites you to dinner and so on, look at what you're doing there. Finally, verse 31. So whether you eat or drink, or whatever you do all for the glory of God. So that's number one, for God's glory. Am I glorifying him in what I'm doing? Number two, verse 32. Give no offense to Jews or to Greeks or to the church of God, just as I've just given you my example in chapter 9. Just as I try to please everyone in everything I do, not seeking my own advantage, but that of many, that they may be saved, which is what he ended chapter 9 with. You remember that I do it all for the sake of the gospel, so that I might save as many as possible. And then his final conclusion, be imitators of me as I am an imitator of Christ. And the thing about Christ is the fact that he had his rights, which he set aside for our salvation. So I'm following his example. you follow my example. Okay, so I hope I've shown you that it's one thought that Paul is dealing with here until chapter 11, verse 2. And one way in which you can see it, what is the first word at the beginning of chapter 8? The very first word. Huh? Now, what is the first word in chapter 11, verse 2? Yeah. So he's begun another subject. There's no now in between verse 8, chapter 8 and the beginning of chapter 11. There's no now, because he's dealing with the same thing. Okay, so that's just a typical example that comes out of a lot of study. Okay, if you are just sort of droning along, you miss these sections. And sometimes you are at the mercy of those who were subdividing ahead of you. But if you do quite a bit of homework, you can begin to see where the subdivisions are. Okay? So in my notes I've said, do not necessarily follow the subdivisions already put there by the translators of your version of the Bible. That is their preferred subdivision. As you study more, your subdivisions may change, as you've noticed mine changed there. For now, at least, it gives you a sense of movement. Now, let's suppose you now have one of those sections. Okay, so you're now clear. Here is one section. So we want to concentrate now on that one section. Work out a flow diagram, which is the work you'll be doing this afternoon. About Shani over lunch. Oh, okay, 15 minutes, not bad, not bad. I will have to disappear while getting lunch, briefly. I've been running a conference somewhere else for 2 days, and the reason why he brought that note is we're supposed to be concluding that conference. So I told them I'll just come back briefly to wrap up, and then I'll shoot back here. Okay, so I hope I'll find some lunch hanging around somewhere. Yeah. It can be caught over speeding for religious reasons. Okay, yeah, so the flow diagram is quite simple. In fact, it's what helped me to decipher this entire passage, because you want to ask yourself the question, okay, we'll reach it in a moment. In fact, it's actually in my notes here. Every sentence has a noun and a verb, or a pronoun and a description. Every sentence. Okay? It has who or what it's about, and it also has the description or the action. So, what you will be doing in the teaching sections, to try and do it in the narratives is going to take you forever. But in the teaching sections, you want to know who is this about, or what is it about, and then what is being said about that thing. Number two, you then want to see what else is being said that develops this further. So let me use the example of a tree. Okay, so a tree has the main stem. But then immediately after the main stem, it then has a number of branches, and those branches then have a number of other branches. So what you want to do with sincerity, okay, so you're not forcing your ideas into that passage. You're asking yourself the question, what is this about? Now, the passage I took you, for instance, it was very clear it was about idolatry. So, before long, you notice that this idolatry issue is being handled in terms of knowledge, in terms of love, and in terms of rights. So those become the clear branches. And so when it comes to rights, the apostle branches off a little more, but he's still dealing with rights, but is now using himself as an example on rights. So you are not getting lost. You know you are still dealing with idolatry, except he has taken this rights thing a little further. And before long, he is coming back to the branch that is dealing with idolatry, and he is making sure that he's not leaving people the impression that it's okay to indulge in idolatry, because there are a lot of other things that attach themselves to idolatry. And then, before long, he comes right back to love and rights and concludes there. So, just learning to see what's the main issue and then proceeding with that. An obvious example I can give you, chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians is not about love. It's about gifts, okay? But yes, as he's handling gifts, he then wants to show the best way to handle the fighting over gifts. And he says the best way is to bring in love. But soon after that, he continues in gifts. So once you are clear what the main thing is, you are able then to start seeing the branches that are still dealing with this main thing. Okay, so sorry for putting a pin in that balloon of yours over your anniversaries and so on. Okay, so I've said every sentence has a noun or pronoun. In other words, it's either he or it, which would be the pronouns, or it is John and Mary, or it's a lion and a tribe or whatever, nation. So there's a noun, and then there's a verb or description. So this nation, the people of Israel went into captivity, or the people of Israel were rebellious. Okay, so it's what they did or how they described. And then we are following the branches. Be clear what the main branch is, or the trunk, and then be clear about all these subdivisions. Thankfully, English is very helpful, because English has connecting words, and, but, because, therefore, and so on. So these phrases that enable you to see the connections. Now, the flow diagram is something I've done for about 35 years maybe, between 33 and 35 years. It was taught me by my friend Happy Ngoma when he was still at Tika, which is a long time ago. But whoever taught him at Tika, one day he came to me and says, Conrad, do you know that these passages, you can draw them like this? And I've remained with it up to now. If you were to come and see my notes, that's the way I handle. It just helps to clarify what is being said on a passage of scripture. So we will do something like that in a moment. Um, what I think I should do, because this you have to see. So I will take a picture of what is here, and then I will send it to Mr. Chingambo. If he doesn't love you, he won't send it to you. But it will have nothing to do with me, okay? But I really think that, yeah, in fact, I could do it straight from here. So that it looks as nice as possible. So this is an example. When you come back from lunch, I really need you to work on a different passage, but do it this way. And I am hoping that it will really help you. So let me move it to my phone, and then from there it will be easier to handle it. Yeah. Okay. So, at least a number of you I know, so I will send to a few of you who we love each other and we relate regularly. So let's see. Yeah. Okay, now I have 2 Oliver Wowers, so I will throw in. You've got both phone numbers, eh? Yes. Okay, good. So one of them you will get, okay, Katemba, although he's a visitor here, but he might. Let me see, I've got Mugala as well. So that way, even if you are in bad relations with Mr. Chingambo, you will be preserved. Okay, so I've sent to 4 individuals in here, and they can then send, okay, yeah, let me send to Achilles, since the interns are not in a relationship with anybody here. Although after 3 weekends, there's little excuse, but I will still feel sorry for them. Okay, so you will pass it on to the others. Okay, so if you haven't received a message by now, just mention your name to whoever knows you in here. A document has been circulated. There you are. Okay, so I really need us to see. Let's go to Philippians 1. At least we've got 2 to 3 minutes. I can just introduce that. Philippians 3, what am I saying? Philippians 1, verse 3. Philippians 1, verse 3. So it says, I thank my God in all my remembrance of you. The primary person or the primary noun there is God. Okay? So if you look at my flow chart, I have begun with I thank, but I have deliberately put my God there as the primary noun. Now, so he is being thanked, but notice the extra. In all my remembrance. Okay, so there is a recognition that this thanking happens when he thinks about something. And what is that he thinks about? I bring it as a separate item. Okay? And it is my remembrance of you. So it's not of my wife or my husband or of Titus or Timothy, but it is of you, the Philippians. Now, there are more things that he is saying about this thanking. And you notice it in verse 4 when he says, always. So he thanks God in all his remembrance. He thanks God always. He thanks God in every prayer of his. And again, there's the extra, for you all. And he thanks God, his God, while making his prayer with joy. So the main thing he's doing there is thanking God. And yet there are about 4 things that he mentions about that thanking God. And it's easier to notice it because of the flow chart that I'm talking about. Otherwise, without doing that, it's just one entire sentence. You can't tell where it's starting from or where it's ending. And then, verse 5 is separate. Why is he thanking God? And he's thanking God as a separate thing because of your partnership. Then that partnership is described in a number of ways. First of all, the partnership is in the gospel, and the partnership is long haul. It was from the first day until now. So forget this other part, because that's now going to go into the sermon. All I want you to do after lunch is this first part. That's all. But we are going to start now. So please go into your groups. Those of you who don't have an English teacher, I'm sorry. It will be a bit torturous to do this, because you might have someone who talks a lot and he will take you into the river. But if you've got a teacher of English who knows what a noun is, a verb is, and so on, pronouns, it will be a lot easier. But let's get back into, so we'll remain with Philippians chapter 1. But what I want you to do is to use chapter 1, verse 12, verse 13. Yeah. So, is anything not clear? Philippians. No, chapter 1. We're still in chapter 1. But now I want us to I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. Just that part. I want the kind of flow chart you've seen here. And remember, the connections and are very helpful. Yeah, 12 and 13. Only. So you will help yourselves in the group to come up with a chart like this. As I said, don't worry about this second part here, because that side is what the message now will end up being. It comes from what is on the first side. Is anything not clear? If you're completely lost, hopefully in your group, you'll soon be going, aha, okay, now I understand. Because then when you now come to bringing out your sermonic material or your teaching material, you will see that you will be very faithful to the text. Very faithful. You won't be inventing things on your own. Okay? I want us to do that exercise. So, since they said 1:15 and 1:15 has come, they are not yet here. Let's come into our groups. There was one group here, there's another group here, and two somewhere in between, and then the last day. Let's get back there. Let's do the flow charts. I'll just disappear briefly, as I said, I'm wanted, but by 2 o'clock, I will definitely be back.